In modern WWE history, few debuts were as shocking as the night Nexus stormed in from the crowd, tore apart an episode of Raw, and turned everything into a full-blown riot on live TV. Every member, from Wade Barrett, Daniel Bryan, Heath Slater to faces fans thought they'd forgotten, followed their own path once that black and gold N disappeared. Some reached the very top, others quietly walked away from the ring, and a few branched out into acting, martial arts, the circus, or music. So where did their lives go after the Nexus storm passed? Let's get started right now. Wrestling Sphere, go! 1. Wade Barrett. If Nexus was a real televised uprising, then Wade Barrett was the ringleader who made the whole thing feel legit. With his towering frame, cold expression, and rough, gravelly voice straight out of a back-alley brawler movie, Barrett walked out looking less like a regular wrestler and more like a gang boss. The moment he stood in the middle of the Nexus circle, the whole group suddenly felt heavier, more dangerous, like, okay, this is a serious threat. Even though he never captured a world title, Barrett's run in WWE was far from forgettable. He held the Intercontinental Championship multiple times, won the 2015 King of the Ring, and constantly shed his skin with new personas, from the street-fighting, bare-knuckle brawler, to the bad news-delivering, Bad News Barrett, to the arrogant Lord, King Barrett. Each version highlighted a different side of him: intense, sarcastic, clever, and always able to grab the crowd's attention. But Barrett's WWE story is also tied to nagging injuries and stop-start booking that never fully cashed in on his potential. When the big opportunities didn't come the way people hoped, and his body was getting more and more worn down, he chose to leave WWE in 2016, closing a chapter that always felt a bit unfinished. After that, Barrett tried his hand at acting, taking a few film roles and popping up in different places. Then he unexpectedly returned to WWE, but this time behind the commentary desk. Under his real name, Stu Bennett, he became a familiar voice on NXT and later SmackDown, bringing that same villain energy and dark, commanding tone to every line he delivered. Barrett often half-jokes that he retired early as an in-ring performer. But when you listen to him talk and break things down on air, a lot of fans still believe that if Wade ever laced up the boots again, and WWE gave him just a few weeks of storytelling, the crowd would roar for him like he never left. 2. Daniel Bryan. If you had to compare which moment went by faster, Daniel Bryan's time in Nexus or his 18-second loss to Sheamus at WrestleMania 28, the answer would probably be a draw. His stint with Nexus was so brief that many fans barely had time to process it before everything flipped upside down. He made headlines in a way no one expected. WWE fired him immediately after Nexus' chaotic debut, all because he choked Justin Roberts with a tie on live TV, an image considered too much for broadcast standards at the time. A few months later, WWE quietly opened the door for him to return. On screen, they explained his exit by saying Bryan regretted his out-of-control actions, refused to keep following Nexus' brutal path, and was turned on by the group. In reality, that twist ended up being an invisible turning point that sent his career down a completely different road. Once he stepped out from Nexus' shadow, the American Dragon shot upward with no brakes. He won multiple world championships, became the face of every underdog who'd ever been underestimated, and led the Yes movement, a chant so loud it felt like it could blow the roof off every arena. The peak came at WrestleMania 30, where Bryan walked in as the fans' chosen hero and walked out a champion in every sense of the word. When injuries forced him to announce his retirement, many people thought that fairy tale had reached its final page. But Bryan once again defied the odds, returned to the ring, and even held the WWE Championship as the Planet's Champion, a character who was infuriating and fascinating at the same time. After saying goodbye to WWE, he went back to the name Bryan Danielson and headed to AEW. There, he wrestles like a pure warrior, long, technical, hard-hitting matches against some of the best in the world. From a brief, blink and you miss him piece of Nexus, Bryan rose to become one of the most respected pillars of an entire generation of modern wrestlers. 3. Skip Sheffield. Back when he was still called Skip Sheffield in Nexus, Ryan Reeves was presented as a true, big dumb country powerhouse. Stone-faced, rough around the edges, always yelling and then charging in to wreck everything in front of him. That character made him recognizable, but WWE clearly knew his ceiling was higher than just a goofy catchphrase and a few wild brawls. Slowly, Skip Sheffield vanished, making way for a fully upgraded version. From that country brute, Ryan was repackaged as Ryback, a walking muscle machine in every sense. This time, He hardly needed to talk. He'd just march out with a menacing stare, veins popping, then tear through opponents in relentless, high-impact squashes. The act felt like a mix of Goldberg and Ultimate Warrior. No nonsense, straight-ahead destruction, and every time he screamed, "Feed me more!" the whole arena would chant along. At his peak, Ryback was pushed hard. A long streak of dominant TV wins, feuds with CM Punk and John Cena, multiple shots near the WWE Championship, and for a while he was one of the hottest names in the company. But that rise didn't last forever. As his booking became repetitive and some match decisions turned heads in the wrong way, his momentum slowed and then dipped. By 2016, tension over pay and how revenue was being shared between him and WWE boiled over. Feeling he wasn't being valued or compensated properly, Ryback chose to leave, ending his WWE run with a lingering sense of what could have been. Since then, he's only popped up on a few independent shows, and even those appearances have become rare as years of smash-mouth wrestling have piled up injuries. Instead of risking his health on a brutal schedule, Ryback pivoted to hosting the Conversation with the Big Guy podcast, building his Feed Me More supplement brand, and being very active online. From a monster, once viewed as a potential cornerstone of a Nexus 2.0, Ryback today is known more as a controversial internet personality than a full-time in-ring destroyer like he used to be. 4. Husky Harris. It's wild to think there was a time when Husky Harris was just a big guy standing in the background of Nexus, instead of the leader of a cult who owned the atmosphere every time he walked to the ring. In those early days, he showed up like an extra body, heavy frame, some stiff offense, but almost no real story or identity of his own. Then Husky was sent back to the developmental system, seemingly disappearing from the audience's radar. But that step backward ended up becoming the starting point for one of the most impressive reinventions of the modern era. In the dark corners of NXT, Ryan Rotunda began piecing together a new version of himself, leaving the name Husky Harris behind to be reborn as Bray Wyatt. No longer a nameless wrestler, he emerged as a deranged preacher, sitting in a rocking chair with a lantern in his hand, smiling while delivering chilling, cryptic monologues. The Wyatt family was born, bringing with it the image of a fanatical clan straight out of a nightmare, colliding with legends like John Cena, Randy Orton, and The Undertaker. From being just another follower in Nexus, Bray became the focal point of a whole new horror wave in WWE. He didn't stop there. He pushed everything to another level with The Fiend, a masked monster tied to the Firefly Funhouse universe, like a children's show warped into something sinister. Fans may argue over how the company handled that character, but almost everyone agrees Bray Wyatt had a rare creative mind, enough to leave his mark with a universal title reign and a long list of moments that stuck in fans' heads. Tragically, that story was cut short when Bray passed away suddenly at a very young age, leaving behind his family and an entire world of characters that never got to be fully explored. From being Husky Harris in Nexus, a name many had forgotten, he finished his path as Bray Wyatt, a figure fans now remember with both respect and deep regret. 5. Mason Ryan. From the moment he appeared, Mason Ryan was labeled as a Welsh version of Batista. Impressive height, sculpted muscles, a sharp, stone-cold face, and a walk that radiated danger. When he joined the second incarnation of Nexus, he was slotted in as the Silent Machine. Few words, barely any expression, and just standing behind the group was enough to make it feel like they had a guy who could crush anyone in seconds. That near-perfect physique became his biggest highlight on WWE programming. After Nexus broke up, WWE tried to position him as a babyface, putting him against names like Dolph Ziggler and Jack Swagger, hoping fans would see him as a standalone star instead of a Batista clone. But things didn't unfold as planned. Ryan's in-ring work wasn't bad, but it wasn't distinct enough to pull him out from under his predecessor's shadow. Every time he came out, people compared everything: his build, his offense, even his poses, and it was incredibly hard for Mason to build a truly convincing identity of his own. Gradually, he was sent back down to NXT, trying to rediscover himself in a smaller environment, but as new generations kept arriving, his chances shrank. In 2014, WWE decided to let him go, closing the book on a short but heavily hyped run for the Welsh giant. Instead of bouncing around the independent scene like many former WWE talents, Mason Ryan took a completely different route. He joined Cirque du Soleil, becoming the chief archer in the show Ka in Las Vegas. From someone whose job used to be slamming opponents to the mat, he shifted to training choreography, acrobatics, and weapon performances almost every night at the MGM Grand, using his massive frame in a completely different way. more fluid, artistic, and theatrical. Ryan rarely talks about a return to wrestling and can basically be considered retired from the ring. But his story highlights something interesting. Leaving WWE doesn't mean you have to stay stuck in the wrestling world. There are other stages, other lights, where a former Nexus member like Mason Ryan can build an entirely new life as a performer. 6. Darren Young. Back in his NXT days, Darren Young was introduced as a party boy from South Beach. Trademark gelled-up hair, a constant bright smile, always acting carefree and relaxed. But that playful vibe did little to soften his demanding mentor CM Punk. Young was often chewed out by Punk, who felt he wasn't serious enough and didn't deserve the opportunity he'd been given. Joining Nexus immediately toughened up Young's image. Standing alongside the crew that wreaked havoc on Raw every week, he looked less harmless and a bit more dangerous. But the run ended almost as fast as it began. After the wild brawl at SummerSlam, Darren Young became one of the first names kicked out of the group, and he nearly vanished from the main storyline picture. When Nexus dissolved, his path shifted toward less visible territory. Young was sent to B-level shows and NXT Redemption, struggling to find his place until he teamed up with Titus O'Neil to form the Primetime Players. That tag team is what really brought him into focus. Together, they crafted the image of two guys who were both funny and confident, chanting millions of dollars, with an incredibly catchy little dance everywhere they went. Their tag team title reign wasn't long, but it was enough for fans to remember them as a true entertainment act. In 2017, WWE released Young. However, instead of fading off the wrestling map, he came back under his real name, Fred Rosser, grinding away on the independent circuit. Rosser not only held his ground outside WWE, he became one of the most notable openly gay wrestlers of the modern era, especially in New Japan Pro Wrestling Strong, where he captured major gold and regularly appeared in big matches. From a pretty forgettable piece of the Nexus lineup, Fred Rosser steadily rebuilt himself into a symbol of representation and diversity, proving that when the WWE door closes, it doesn't mean your story has to end. 7. Michael Tarver. Right from his very first appearance, with that blank, icy stare and martial arts posture, Michael Tarver looked like the executioner Nexus sent to the front line. The kind of guy you call when you want someone beaten so badly they can't stand back up. His solid, compact frame and slow, menacing walk made him stand out even when he was just standing in the background. But Tarver's WWE run turned out to be much shorter than that aura suggested. After the main event of SummerSlam 2010, he gradually vanished from major shows due to a groin injury. Rumors of a comeback floated around for a while, but his contract was never renewed, and by mid-2011 WWE decided to let him go, cutting short his dream on the big stage. Once he left the company, Tarver kept grinding on various independent circuits, then had a brief stint in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Even though he maintained an impressive physique, he never exploded the way people once hoped, especially as new generations of talent kept flooding in and pushed the name Michael Tarver further down the pecking order. Realizing he couldn't cling to wrestling forever, he deliberately searched for a different road. Tarver began focusing on powerlifting, using his size and strength to enter strength competitions, while also chasing his passion for music. He released several Christian hip-hop tracks, blending the image of a former heel stable member with themes of faith, redemption, and personal transformation. In recent years, Tarver has rarely returned to the ring. Most of his time now revolves around family, barbells, and the recording studio, becoming a clear example of someone who pivoted when the WWE door closed, knowing life after wrestling is still a long journey. 8. Justin Gabriel. In a Nexus lineup packed with big bruisers, Justin Gabriel was the piece that brought a completely different flavor. The South African highflyer with a 450 splash as smooth as silk, landing on his opponents with barely a ripple, was the group's designated flyer, the one who delivered visual spectacle instead of just using body weight to crush people. Every time he climbed the ropes, the crowd already knew something worth waiting for was coming. After Nexus broke up, Gabriel teamed up with Heath Slater, captured the tag titles, and had a decent run as part of the division. When the duo split, he got a light push as a babyface, a friendly highflyer who always delivered eye-catching aerial offense. However, despite his efforts, Gabriel's role stayed stuck around the lower card, with no long-term stories built around him. That feeling of being trapped in limbo slowly wore down his patience. Right before Royal Rumble 2015, Justin Gabriel asked for his release from WWE. Once he walked away, he shed the old name and was reborn as PJ Black, the Darewolf of Lucha Underground, then continued roaming through Ring of Honor, NWA, and a long list of independent promotions around the globe. His reckless, daredevil style remained his calling card, to the point he once suffered a serious accident while base jumping and paid for it with part of a finger. Even with injuries piling up, PJ Black has never fully stepped away from the ring. He wrestles, trains younger talent, and passes on what he's learned, becoming a familiar face on many major independent cards. From a Nexus member once seen as someone who never got enough TV time, he's turned himself into living proof that a wrestler doesn't need WWE to build a steady, respected career, as long as they have a distinct in-ring personality and the toughness to keep going after every hard fall. 9. Heath Slater. In a Nexus lineup full of intimidating faces, Heath Slater stood out in the exact opposite way. Bright red hair, a babyface look, a loud mouth overflowing with confidence. But once the bell rang, he was usually the first one to get flattened. From the very beginning, he was slotted as the group's comic relief. The guy who added a bit of ridiculous color and made fans laugh in the middle of the chaos Nexus brought to every show. After the group split, Slater pretty much carried that role for his entire career. From 3MB, the goofball rock band, act with Drew McIntyre and Jinder Mahal, to the stretch where he was constantly thrown out there to be destroyed by legends, special guests, and random stars, he was usually the one taking the beating. Strangely enough, the more he got wrecked, the more the fans seemed to like him. The peak of that unlucky but never broken character came with the I Got Kids story, where Slater played the part of a jobless dad with a bunch of children, desperate to earn a contract at any cost. That struggle led to his unlikely handshake with Rhino, and the two of them shockingly captured the SmackDown Tag Team titles, to the delight of the crowd. Even so, when WWE did its big roster cuts in 2020, Slater was on the list of releases. He got one brief return on TV to face Drew McIntyre and close the loop on their old 3MB bond, former bandmate versus newly crowned world champion. After that, he signed with Impact Wrestling under the simple name Heath, reunited with Rhino, kept chasing tag gold, and held on to the image of the unlucky but upbeat father who always tries to stand back up. In recent years, Heath Slater has wrestled less frequently, appearing here and there on independent shows. He may never have touched a world title, but his name still comes up whenever people talk about Nexus, or about the one-man band type of wrestler who proves that with charm and persistence, you can still etch yourself deeply into the fans' memories. 10. David Otunga. Among all the faces who ever wore the Nexus armband, David Otunga is the one who stuck with the name the longest, from the group's shocking debut all the way until Nexus vanished from TV. The funny thing is, if you look at his resume, he almost feels out of place in a WWE locker room. Law school graduate, former reality show contestant, and at one point married to famous singer, actress Jennifer Hudson. Within Nexus, Otunga was never the guy who scared people with brute force or wild aggression. He rarely stood out as the most dangerous man in a brawl, but he always showed up at key moments, stood next to the main players, and appeared in most of the group's major segments. He held the Tag Team Championship twice. Once with John Cena during the reluctant hero forced into Nexus storyline, and once with Michael McGillicuddy, carving his name into the history of the division even if he was never the flashiest in-ring performer. Once Nexus fell apart, WWE leaned into his education and sharp, polished look to shift him into a new lane, the television lawyer. Otunga became John Laurinaitis' legal advisor, constantly showing up on screen in tailored suits that looked as sharp as his ring gear. Bit by bit, he moved away from being a full-time wrestler and settled into the role of spokesman, the guy who defended his bosses with legal jargon instead of punches. After his last match in 2015, Otunga more or less closed the in-ring chapter and transitioned fully into commentary and pre-show panels, while also practicing law and appearing in a few film projects on the side. In recent years, he's only popped up on WWE programming here and there as a guest or analyst when needed. From a Nexus member standing in the middle of chaotic beatdowns, David Otunga chose to build a life outside the ropes using his law degree, calm demeanor, and professional image, keeping just enough of a link to the wrestling world without having to rely on it anymore. 11. CM Punk. When CM Punk took over Nexus at the end of 2010, the group almost instantly morphed into his own personal cult. Instead of just being a gang of rebellious wrestlers, Punk made the members go through bizarre initiation rituals, taking beatings, sacrificing themselves, and blindly following the leader's orders. Heath Slater and Justin Gabriel couldn't stomach that level of control and bailed one after another, leaving behind a twisted new Nexus that perfectly reflected Punk's vibe, rebellious, extreme, and dripping with psychological mind games. Once he stepped out from Nexus' shadow, CM Punk's career absolutely exploded. He dropped the legendary pipe bomb, a promo that tore down the wall between storyline and reality, and then walked into the classic Money in the Bank 2011 match, where he left Chicago with the WWE Championship and walked out of the company on live TV. What followed was a title reign of over 400 days that transformed Punk from that indie guy they brought up to the main roster into the central figure of the entire promotion. But that same unwillingness to bow his head eventually led to deeper and deeper friction with WWE. Feeling burned out, mistreated, and fed up, Punk walked away before his contract ran its course and left in early 2014. From then on, the name CM Punk turned into a living myth, worshipped by part of the fanbase as a symbol of freedom, but forever tied to the word controversial. After trying his hand at MMA and doing commentary for combat sports, Punk shocked the wrestling world by returning to the ring for another promotion, working big marquee matches while also being surrounded by constant backstage drama. It seemed impossible that he'd ever go home again, until, in a twist nobody dared predict, Punk suddenly reappeared in WWE nearly a decade later, standing in the middle of a deafening ovation like the fallout had never happened. At this stage, CM Punk isn't the leader of any faction. He's more like the final era rebel, a symbol of the kind of wrestler who says what others won't, and is willing to pay the price just to stay loyal to what he believes in. 12. Michael McGillicuddy. As the son of the legendary Mr. Perfect, Michael McGillicuddy carried a heavy shadow on his shoulders from the very first day he stepped into WWE. Fans didn't just see him as an NXT rookie, but as the heir to the Perfect bloodline. He joined Nexus during a transitional phase of the group, after teaming with Wade Barrett to defeat John Cena and officially becoming a new piece of the faction. He wasn't loud or flashy, but McGillicuddy was a familiar face in Nexus ranks, especially when he and David Otunga captured the WWE Tag Team Championship, one of the few major milestones under that name. When the Nexus brand slowly faded from TV, McGillicuddy's career slid down to the bottom of the card. He quietly appeared in undercard matches, present but rarely treated as a focal point. It wasn't until WWE decided to start over and rebrand him as Curtis Axel, combining Kurt Hennig, his father, and Larry the Axe Hennig, his grandfather, that things finally shifted a bit. Branded as a Paul Heyman guy, Axel enjoyed a brief push, an intercontinental title reign, some spots on big shows, but he still couldn't quite break past the level of a solid mid-card reliable. Later on, Axel found a clearer role in tag team wrestling. The standout run came when he teamed with Bo Dallas as the B-Team. Two guys who seemed destined to be background extras suddenly won the Raw Tag Team Championship, and their cheap entrance theme somehow became a guilty pleasure the crowd loved every time it hit. Eventually, Curtis Axel was released during a round of roster cuts, then spent a short stint working backstage as a producer before more or less vanishing from the mainstream wrestling picture. From Mr. Perfect's son to Curtis Axel, he never built a legendary resume, but his run was long enough and varied enough that whenever fans look back on Nexus, they still remember his name with a bit of fondness and a hint of regret. 13. John Cena. John Cena was never an official member of Nexus, but the storyline where he was forced to join them pretty much snapped their momentum in half. After Wade Barrett made him sign a contract at Hell in a Cell, Cena reluctantly put on the Nexus armband but spent most of his time as a mole from the inside, sabotaging plans, costing the matches, and slowly turning the group from a terrifying force into something of a joke. At Survivor Series, he was fired in the storyline, then not long after came back and absolutely destroyed Barrett at TLC, effectively slamming the coffin shut on the original version of Nexus. The rest of Cena's journey is something most WWE fans could recite by heart. After a dominant stretch stacked with championships, he gradually stepped away from a full-time schedule and moved into a part-timer role, only showing up for special occasions, major events, or international tours that needed a star big enough to pack the house. Every time the time is now hits, people know they're getting one of those rare appearances left in his in-ring lifetime. Outside WWE, Cena slowly turned into a true Hollywood star. From family movies and over-the-top adult comedies to action blockbusters and even a superhero role in a cinematic universe, he proved he could do more than just shout, "You can't see me." He could carry an entire film on his shoulders. Even with a packed schedule, Cena still drops back into WWE from time to time, works a special match or two, and grabs the mic to talk very honestly about how the final season of his wrestling life is approaching. And now, things have reached a clear end point. This December, the 17-time world champion will step into his final match, closing out a glorious in-ring chapter in WWE. From the man who tore Nexus apart in storyline, John Cena has become a living legend, a name tied to an entire era that anyone who's ever watched WWE finds nearly impossible to ignore. That's what happened to the members of Nexus after that storm from years ago finally passed. If there's someone who still stands out to you the most, let us know in the comments, hit like, subscribe to Wrestling Sphere, and ring the bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos.